Hello, my name is Johnny Rodgers. My wife and I own and operate Rodgers Cattle Company in Person County, North Carolina. And we've been managing livestock on this particular farm since 2001. And we really enjoy managing the grass and the livestock and working with pasture ecology and grazing systems. We've been grazing solar since 2015. The solar farm that you see behind me, the summer of 2015 was our first grazing season there. We started off just grazing and letting the solar company come behind us and mow the vegetation that the sheep did not eat. And we've been grazing this solar farm as well as 3 others since 2014. The percentage of our grazing acres that are on solar site is probably around 10 to 15%. And some of that, about half of that is on this farm that we're on now, and the others are within about a 5-mile radius of where we live. Yeah, we like to offer total vegetative management to solar companies. What that means to us is that we graze with our sheep, and we also do that with a combination of mowing, which may involve some, weed eating or string trimmers of that nature. Half the solar farms we graze, we can mow a lot of that with a tractor and a 15-foot batwing bush hog. It's open enough for us to do that. And then we can go behind that with zero turn and string trimmers to try and dress the side up. Unfortunately, the other 2 solar farms, it's all zero turn lawnmowers and weed eaters, and that can make for some pretty long days, on a zero turn. Our opportunity to graze solar sites were probably a little unusual. The farm that we live on since 2001, our landlord decided to build one and then an additional solar farm on that particular farm. So when folks ask me, why do you graze solar? I said, well, I was a sheep farmer before that, sheep and cattle farmer, and the solar farms kind of came to us. So it almost happened as just one of those divine intervention moments, I guess. Our landlord actually broached the subject with the solar company, and then through a couple of conversations with the solar company, we were able to strike a deal. And like I said originally, with this solar farm, we were only going to provide grazing, and they were going to do any cleanup mowing that needed to be done. But one thing they did do that was really good is they put a gate on the backside of this solar farm where we could walk the sheep in and walk them out, from the rest of the farm, which again is unusual for a solar site. But our overall experience in working with solar companies have been really good. There's been a couple of moments where there's been miscommunications there, but nothing that we couldn't clear up. And I would advise folks, if they're wanting to graze a solar site, to be very persistent. It takes a lot of time. You'll go through a lot of layers of folks to get to the folks that are in charge of grazing and can help you get started with grazing solar farms. The details of solar grazing contracts are quite variable from one solar company to the other. I know one solar company we work with, they had a grazing contract that they provided to us, and we were able to provide some input. While another solar company we worked with, they kind of asked us to come up with what we thought would be a good arrangement. And we were able to find some templates through the American Solar Grazing Association to go ahead and design a grazing contract for us to work with that company on. So as far as payment goes, we send out quarterly invoices to all the solar companies, and they seem to like that, where we stretch it out throughout the year. I guess in some cases I thought, well, maybe it would make more sense, since this is mainly a green season event, maybe you just do it during the summertime and fall. But we just do ours quarterly, and that kind of helps us keep up with it until we started working with a different O&M provider with one of the solar farms we work with, and then they preferred monthly billing. So we're able to accomplish that. And again, good communication is key to having a good relationship, with a solar company. Access to solar sites, I hear, can be quite variable. With the 4 farms that we work with, we're able to use those on a 12-month basis at our discretion. Because of the location, again, we literally live on the farm that 2 of the farms are located on. It is quite handy to be able to use those 12 months out of the year. We did lamb the first year in the solar site and actually got along pretty good. And then we decided that we wanted to lamb a little more intensively, so we pull them out and actually bring them up closer to a barn where we'll let the ewes lamb out and then provide them, a jugging experience. And then after the lambs get a little bit bigger, we'll introduce them back to the solar farm. We do that because it is more difficult to find sheep in solar sites, even though ours are smaller type solar sites. It's still harder to find them. If you do need to lay your hands on them, it can be quite difficult to do in a solar farm as compared to an open pasture. As we look toward the future, probably our cost of production, we have to be very competitive with our grazing. I like to call it a hybrid model, a grazing plus mowing. We know we have to be very competitive with the other alternatives that solar companies had, principally mowing. But we do think there's quite a few advantages, to the grazing hybrid model. I think you can build soil health with grazing systems. Certainly we're burning less fossil fuel. If we're providing grazing to a solar site, we typically will have 2 to 4 mowings a year, depending on how much rainfall you get in that given year. And I've heard many solar companies say that they're looking most of the time at 5 to 8 mowings per year. And so far, I think we're very competitive with that. And I think there's a lot of potential to improve the efficiency of the grazing/mowing systems. Marketing is very key to any type of farming operation, so a farm system that uses solar would be no exception to that. We have probably used word of mouth to establish our relationship with solar companies. We've got one solar company that we work really well with, and because it's just me and my wife, we kind of like to keep our solar grazing close to home, so we don't want to venture out too far because both of us still have occupations off the farm. And when it comes to marketing our sheep, it's really pretty easy. There is a growing demand for lamb, both in traditional and non-traditional market systems, for the market sheep for meat production. And then selling ewe lambs, because of the demand for solar, really selling, the breeding class of lambs, ewes and ewe lambs, is really quite easy. You just have to, put an ad out there on social media or just tell a few folks that are in the know, and you can sell breeding sheep pretty easy these days. One of the unique aspects of our farm, Rodgers Cattle Company, is until August of 2022, we operated on 100% leased farmland. And part of that was solar, a smaller percentage of that was solar. And we actually did buy a farm in the neighboring county, Granville County, just to the east of us. And it's a row crop and timber farm, so we're going to spend the rest of our life turning that into a grazing operation. But we bought that, kind of as an investment and a place maybe to retire. It's a smaller operation compared to the one that we live on and lease today. But leasing farmland, I think, is a great opportunity for young folks to get started because the price of land ownership really needs to be viewed as a separate investment opportunity and not necessarily part of the operations of a grazing system. So I guess to sum that up, you don't have to own the land in order to have a successful grazing operation. Yeah, if we were going to look at a new opportunity maybe to lease some pasture, there's some things that we would look at. Number one would be the existing fence and existing infrastructure that's on the particular pasture. Does it have good fencing? Does it have existing water sources? Maybe some type of corral or catch pen for either cattle and or sheep. If you're talking about grazing sheep there, would the existing fence hold sheep, or would it contain your livestock guardian dogs and at least slow predators down? Because we know that's an issue with our sheep. The other thing that I would think about is the size of the parcel of land relative to the distance from where we live. And the bigger the parcel of land, the further you can go. And I think that would kind of make sense because it's going to cost you something to go to that farm every day. And if it's really close by, then it could be quite small because the cost would be relatively inexpensive. But as you start going further away, you need more animal units to help you pay for that lease and the lease itself and any kind of improvements you need to make, as well as just the day-to-day travel to go check on your livestock. You know, if we were evaluating solar as opposed to just open pasture land, it would really be very similar. Again, distance and relative size would come into play quite a bit. We had an opportunity this past year to bid on 3 additional solar farms for a company that we really like working with, but it was going to be about an hour away. And again, everything else we're working with at this time is probably within 10 minutes. So we really kind of weighed the options. The attractive part, there was 3 solar sites and they were all within about 20 minutes of each other. So once you got there, you did have, you know, a nice bit of land that you could work with. But we elected not to put in a bid. We thought about putting one in, then we thought, well, what if we get it, you know, and what would we do? So again, at this point in time, with where we are in our context and our point in our life, right now we've got everything that we can probably look after on our home farm. Yeah, when we start thinking about how solar farms are built, they're not built to be grazing operations, they're built to be solar farms. The good news is that there's several solar companies now that are asking a lot of questions about how could they make each solar site, the new constructions, more grazing friendly, and I think that's exciting to do that. One of the things I think they could do is you know, maybe do some soil sampling and some type of soil amendments up front, like lime, principally, you know, to help with the pH of the land. The other thing is just simple things like the chain link fence. You know, make sure it's snug to the ground and it's not pulled up in places. You know, make sure that we are slowing predators down, if not eliminating predators altogether. On the larger solar sites, I've heard that the solar companies have cost shared or even installed some wells or worked with producers on watering systems. The solar sites that we are currently working with, they're 15 to 50 acres. So it's really not a big deal with that amount of sheep to go ahead and haul water to them. But if you start thinking about some of these utility scale sites that are thousands of acres, then that's going to mean thousands of sheep and lots of water. So certainly having a well on site and maybe some existing permanent infrastructure like barns, corrals, catch pens might make sense on those larger sites. Whereas on some of these smaller sites like we work with, you know, we can kind of go with things that are a little more temporary, maybe some temporary electric fence, portable panels, and of course, hauling water. Probably one of the more challenging solar grazing situations I've encountered is, you know, from a mowing standpoint, there's really been some very wet sites that I've actually got a 4-wheel drive tractor stuck on about 3 times now, and wasn't the same place, but depending on, you know, how wet the conditions are, and you know, it's kind of interesting. You think, well, you know, how could they build a solar farm there? You know, but again, I'm sure went through the channels and everything was fine. But that has been challenging. Just the daily observing and looking at your sheep, or I said daily, it could be multiple times a week, where you go and check on your livestock. Again, if you got a 20-acre pasture, you can walk out there and see your sheep out in that 20-acre pasture. If you got a 20-acre solar farm, it's a little more difficult to go find them. You got to kind of, you know, they can hide down those rows, so you got to get lined up where you can see them. That's not a terrible thing, but again, it takes time to check on your animals, and you know, we're trying to be as efficient as we can to keep cost competitive with other opportunities. Probably the most challenging vegetation management we have, 2 of the sites that we graze were existing tall fescue cool season grass pastures. So as you might imagine, those have turned into pretty good solar grazing opportunities because they were good pastures beforehand. The 3rd site that we grazed was a crop field, kind of a step back a little bit because the vegetation establishment in there, the attention to detail about and good management practices, best management practices to get that vegetation established before you started grazing just wasn't there because again, the main objective was what? build a solar site, right? Yes, they did everything they needed to do from a water quality standpoint. They got everything stabilized, but from a persistency standpoint of the forage stand and the resiliency, it just lacks something to be desired. And probably the worst grazing system that we currently have was a forested site. In other words, they cut down all the trees, stumped it, grubbed it, cleared it, built a solar site on it. And we're starting to take some soil samples of that site, and they're in the mid to low 5s on pH, and anybody that's a farmer knows that we need to be 6 or better. And the problem is with the existing agricultural equipment that we have to put on lime and fertilizer and other amendments like that, they're spin spreaders, aren't they? And that's going to throw stuff on the panels and damage them. So probably going to need to engage with some ag engineering folks about what type of equipment do we need, maybe some drop type spreaders to drop something straight down onto the soil surface that we can use in these solar sites long term. 25 to 30 years is what the site life is on some of these sites. It's a long time, and we're certainly going to have to add some soil amendments over that time. Probably the most favorable solar grazing situation that we have is the solar farm that's behind us here. And again, it's kind of a cop-out, I guess, in a way to pick that one, because it is here on the farm that we live on. Literally, I can walk to it from my house. And the solar company was really good about access on the backside of the solar farm. We can walk them in, walk them out. And they actually went in, and there was a water line that was running straight through that solar farm. So again, it was probably, I don't know for sure, but it was probably damaged during solar construction. So what did the solar company do? They helped us reroute that water line around this solar farm. So now, and we put in 3 quick connect hydrants at key locations around the backside of this solar farm, so we have access to water, pressurized water, while they're in this particular solar site. So again, water access. This was a old stand, fescue pasture before solar farm construction, so the stand of grass is great. There have been, some concerns. There's been some plants coming in there like nimblewheel, pokeweed, broom straw, things of that nature that we're seeing kind of come into the site. That does concern us a little bit, but overall, water access, great forage. And the thing that this field did not have before a solar farm was constructed was shade. There was no shade in this field, and we all know on a day like today, in the South, any type of livestock, cattle or sheep or goats, they need some type of shade. So that's something that the solar panels provide, and sheep typically don't like to be wet either. So they really kind of like the shelter that the solar panels provide. Yeah, when I take a hard look at solar and the impact it's had on Rodgers Cattle Company, our family business, it's just been quite favorable. And it's real interesting, when our landlord told us he was going to build the first solar farm, I kind of had I couldn't say anything. Obviously he was going to do it. It was his land, and I was happy for him to do it. But it kind of set me back a little bit, I wasn't real happy about it. And then I realized that, hey, we're still going to get to graze that land, and we're not going to have to pay any rent for it. So it was free grass, to start with. And of course, nothing's free, and we had time and labor involved in it, and some infrastructure, but not much on this particular solar farm. And then as time went on, we decided that we were going to, provide total vegetative management, to solar companies, and then we would get paid for that service. So it's become a pretty significant line item in our annual budget. So not only do we have the income from the sheep, but we also have income from the service that the sheep provides, and of course that we provide with our mowing, behind the grazing. I guess if someone come to me and said, what are your top things that you would recommend considering before entering a solar grazing agreement? Number one, be patient. There is a lot of turnover in some of the staff at solar farms, at least there seems to be. So it may take you a little while to get to the right person that can make the decisions. And The easiest thing a solar company can do when you bring up grazing is say no. I mean, that is their knee-jerk response in a lot of cases. And that's not with every solar company. Some have become very pro-grazing and really excited about the blending of solar energy and agriculture, working together. I would certainly recommend being patient, finding those key decision makers, just keep making phone calls, keep visiting. Most solar farms, existing solar farms, will have a phone number on a sign at their front gate. Start there and kind of see where it goes. The other thing I would recommend is really take a hard look at providing total vegetative management. One of the things that happened one morning, I had a good amount of grass growing in this solar farm behind us. I was just going to turn the sheep in there that day, as a matter of fact, and I get up, I walked out on my back porch, I could hear mowers running. And lo and behold, it was the solar company, and of course at that time they were providing mowing, and they were mowing down all my beautiful grass that I had ready for my sheep. Again, I should have probably done a better job of communicating what I was going to do. Maybe they should have asked me first, is it okay to mow? That's why I like to provide total vegetative management. That way, things that are beyond my control don't happen as often. I will say this though, there's going to be times when you're working with a solar grazing arrangement. We were working in this farm behind us, and we had our grazing system, our grazing pattern set up, and we had to pull out all of our temporary fencing that we worked pretty hard to put up just because they needed to do some testing inside the solar farm. So again, that can happen on any type of farmland. I remember on some land that we leased, our landlord wanted to harvest some timber on the backside of the farm. So there was a series of fields that we couldn't graze for a period of months during that event. So that can happen on leased land, it can happen on owned land. So you kind of have to roll with the punches, be resilient, stay positive, and have a great time grazing, and make your grazing amazing grazing when you can. I would tell my younger self, to be patient and probably don't assume so much. I mean, it doesn't take much time anymore to call the person that works for the solar company and say, hey, how's things going? We got some beautiful grass up here. We're getting ready to graze it. Oh, I'm glad you let me know that because we're getting ready to mow it. So I think it would be good to just have better communication and again, don't overreact to what can seem like a negative situation. Again, I thought solar was going to be a bad thing for Rodgers Cattle Company in 2014 when I first heard about it. And here we stand now in 2024, 10 years later. It's a very, very important part of what we do here at Rodgers Cattle Company.